And this is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. Before we talk to our first guest tonight, wanted to mention, as I often do, but this time, pay attention to this. You never know what's going to happen in the world, right? Sometimes you see people, sometimes they're gone, they don't show up again, they're here, they're there, somewhere else. But I would like all of you to go to my website, Fader Files, FEDERFILES.com, FEDERFILES.com. And sign up to be on my mailing list. Do me a favor, sign up to be on my mailing list. I'm going to be, I've written a couple of books, and one of them came out about 25 years ago, a very good book of short stories, basically autobiographical stories. And I'm going to add another story and reissue it as an ebook. And I wanted all of you to be aware of it when it comes out. It'll be sometime next month. So go over to the website, Fader Files, and join up. Also, one more thing before we get to our guest, go to a place called Occupied Territory. It's on Facebook. So Google Facebook and Occupied Territory, and you can check out some other stuff that I'm doing and join in. We see now that the presidential candidates have, obviously Biden is in, but now Ryan has been picked, and everybody is running, and everybody knows what everybody's doing, and the politicians are in full force, and we see what's going on. And if you've been listening to this program for a long time, you see that these people are sort of out of control and power hungry. For instance, the executive getting more powerful all the time, that kind of thing. $1 billion going to be spent on it. Sheldon Adelson personally electing the president of the United States. All these people and all these bankers who did all these awful things, never going to jail. And you think to yourself, this is a bunch of psychopaths that I have to choose between, right? Well, somebody recently has written a very interesting article, which I read on Alternate and appeared originally somewhere else, a man named Joe Brewer, who is with us tonight, on what a psychopath is, how they function in society, and what we can do about them, if we can do anything about them. Hi, Joe.
Oh, hello, Mike. How are you doing tonight?
Okay. So I am going, you know what, Joe, I'm going to read your bio. And after that, you could, I have a pretty good idea what it means, but maybe you could translate it into English after I read it.
Of course, happy to.
Because it's got a lot of phrases in it that seem difficult to. All right, Joe Brewer is the director of Cognitive Policy Works, a Seattle-based consulting company that applies insights from cognitive science to accelerate progressive social change. All right, got that much. Joe is a complexity researcher and an innovation strategist who specializes in the study of human semantics as it applies to cultural dynamics. How about a little translation there?
Sure. It's actually simpler than it sounds. Basically, you could say that I study three things. I study patterns, I study people, and I study the planet. And so basically what I'm keenly interested in and have been for quite some time is how we understand all of the changes that are happening around us, and in particular, those that pertain to what things mean. And by that I mean when we define an issue, how did we come to define it the way that we did, and what's going on psychologically inside of us when we define things in certain ways. And then, of course, what are the political and economic consequences of those ways of thinking about things?
All right, so certain psychological types based, and then also our own perceptions, which are all varied and different for various reasons, and how it is we size people up. Like, for instance, we're going to be voting, or a lot of people are going to be voting for one of these two tickets, right? And people will be voting on for all sorts of different reasons, some of which they don't even understand themselves. Some of it comes from the candidates, and some comes from inside people themselves, right?
Yeah, and one of the great things that's come about in the research world through the last few decades is we've gotten a much more sophisticated understanding of what's happening inside people's heads. And this comes from psychology research, but also other areas that study the functioning of the brain, things that look at human community and civilization through the lens of anthropology or sociology, and also language in the study of linguistics and how meaning-making happens in our brains and through language. So we have this real wealth of knowledge coming from these many different research fields that can help us understand when, in politics, someone's choosing to vote the way that they do, that we can say things like a lot of the influence that shaped their decision and shaped their thinking was outside of their conscious awareness. And by outside their conscious awareness, I mean very specifically that the brain is processing that information and they don't have access to it. That kind of thing is becoming much better known now.
So let's start off right with this article, which I read on Alternet. And it starts right off like this. Did you know that roughly 1 person in 100 is clinically a psychopath? And let me just read a little bit more and then we can get into it. These individuals are either born with an emotional deficiency that keeps them from feeling bad about hurting others, or they are traumatized early in life in a manner that causes them to become this way. And then you say, which is really amazing to me, with more than 7 billion people on the planet, that means there are as many as 70 million psychopaths alive today. And these people are more likely to be, well, maybe then you could explain more clearly again, or go into again. What is a psychopath exactly?
A psychopath is the clinical definition used by psychiatrists. A psychopath is a person who, for any of a number of reasons, is unable to process the emotions associated with empathy when they're thinking about harm committed to others. So this is a person who tends to be more self-absorbed. They tend to be more insensitive to the feelings of others. They tend to be people who may be manipulative or exploitative of others because they treat them more like they're tools or objects to manipulate instead of as people with feelings. Mm-hmm. And so one thing that a psychopath is not, just to distinguish it up front, is a psychopath is not a violent criminal.
But a psychopath could be a violent criminal at the same time.
That's right. That's right, but they're not necessarily. And so we're talking about psychopath in the clinical sense here. We're really talking about people whose brains process information in a particular way that keeps them from feeling the negative emotions when harm is caused to others.
So, for instance,
makes them less sensitive to it.
So, for instance, if we just pick somebody from, I'm talking about art, but let's just include the movies. It's something more popular. If you think of Wall Street and Gordon Gekko, he's a psychopath, right?
Yeah, he's just someone who's going along and you're trying to get people to do what he wants them to do.
So if somebody's a banker, let's say let's say somebody's an investment banker at a mythical place called, for instance, Goldman Sachs, and they know a stock is going to go plunging down, and yet they get involved in it in such a way that they sell a whole lot of it to people, make a lot of brokerage fees, even though they know it's going to come plunging down. You're dealing with a lot of psychopaths then who did that, right?
That's a perfect example, almost a classic example of what a psychopath would be. And to kind of put it on the flip side of it, you could think about how most people you know, and probably yourself included, would feel bad about doing something like that, and you would never actually do it. Even if you could see the benefits for yourself, you'd say, wow, I could become really rich, mm-hmm. I could make millions or billions of dollars, but you'd have this feeling, and the feeling would be, man, that would hurt other people, and I don't want to be that kind of person. That feels bad. So most of us have an emotional response that you could say is pro-social, by which I mean it encourages us to think about our impacts on others and makes us more likely to be cooperative and sympathetic. And a person who's a psychopath, like the Goldman Sachs insider trader mm-hmm. or financial wizard, that person is someone who is manipulating, they're basically playing a game mm-hmm. where they are setting things up so they can benefit, and they're not dissuaded at all by the impact they have on another person.
So, for instance, let's say somebody knew that a dictator in a Middle Eastern country didn't have any weapons of mass destruction, but wanted to have a war there for some reason, where millions of people would be displaced, wounded, and killed, and just lied to everybody to get into a war. That would be a psychopath, right?
That would be an exemplary of psychopathic behavior. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we're talking about this, we really need to draw a couple of subtle distinctions, just because this word is so loaded, and we want to be careful not to use it incorrectly. But there's a difference between what I would say a behavior that's a stereotypical psychopathic behavior, what I might also call a psychopathic tendency, mm-hmm. which is where someone may, from time to time, show some behaviors that are what a psychopath would do. And then a person who's been clinically tested, and there are tests you can use to determine if they, in fact, are a psychopath. So when we then draw those three distinctions, we can say that the manipulation of public opinion using misinformation and lies to put us into the military conflict in Iraq, is something that is emblematic of psychopathic behavior, suggesting the key people involved likely have psychopathic tendencies.
Maybe. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No test has been done to determine for sure that they are.
Well, maybe it would be a useful thing to have an amendment to the Constitution that anybody running for a national office should be tested for that, right?
Yeah, it's one of the things that came out of my research on this that I found really interesting is, that we have people who are psychopaths kind of among us. You could say that it's somewhat natural in a kind of evolutionary sense or genetic sense that for some reason that we can't fully explain, that there are psychopaths among us. Just like it's natural that there are people who are born as homosexuals, it's natural there are people that are born as psychopaths. And so there are people that are born with just an orientation that is different from what we call normal. It's not necessarily good or bad in its own, in the fact that it exists. The question that's really important is, what do we do as a society to handle these people that we know have psychopathic behaviors if we know that they're going to be among us? We can't just, put them all on a ship and drown them at sea or put them all in prison, especially all of the people who didn't actually do anything wrong. They just have this tendency.
Oh, of course, if they have this tendency. But that's something actually I wanted to save for later because it does occur later in the article. I was thinking maybe we could just sort of go along, kind of quickly because it's a long article and just sort of hit the high points as we go along, as you built it linearly. So, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, for instance, you say another thing that psychopaths do, they are risk takers, opportunists motivated by self-interest and greed and inclined to dominate or subjugate those around them through manipulative means. Now, this is a kind of a loaded, almost semi-rhetorical question, but we wouldn't even have the United States of America if it wasn't for psychopaths, right?
Yeah, I think that we can look at all of the major civilizations since the birth of agriculture, and we'll get into this history a bit more later.
Yeah.
And we'll see that the entrepreneurial, creative, risk-taking agendas that are set by groups of people are likely going to include some psychopaths among them that may have actually been essential to their success. And so we can even start to explore whether it might be possible to envision that there's a positive role for psychopaths in society if they're properly contained.
If they're contained, correct. I mean, that is the essential point, right? If we as a society cooperatively can restrict them or use them in a very narrow way to achieve certain things, like, for instance, take generals in charge of special operations or people like that, right? Special ops, people like that. That's why we always had civilian control of the army in this country until recently, that is. But basically that you could make sure that these Dobermans are leashed, right?
Yeah, and at the same time, if we have someone who's really good at gaming a system to win, and we want that person to inform our strategies for business. We want them to inform our strategies to national security. But we don't want them to have free reign and carte blanche access to just dictate what the agenda is.
Right. All right. So you say you're talking about 70 million people, which is a hell of a lot of people. And considering the fact that you're saying here, and I can follow along on this, if they're risk takers and they're generally aggressive and they work hard and they go after what they want, you sort of have to be on constant watch for these people since they're all over the place. They tend to just want to organize everything and run everything for their own benefit. So you have to be on guard all the time, right?
Well, it's actually a funny thing that you mention that, because it's not simply that we have to be on guard against them, but that actually we have to establish a set of social norms that are the most dominant norms in society that are centered around cooperation, compassion, altruism, treating people well. And if we have, say, for rhetorical or kind of theoretical purposes, imagine if someone built a global economy based on selfishness and greed, then that would give the psychopaths free rein to destabilize global systems, say the financial system as an example, and they would actually be celebrated as heroes and would be rewarded for their efforts.
But this is obviously not theoretical. You're almost describing what's happening today, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I was being a bit facetious with.
I know, but I know.
And so what we've done is we've built a civilization around, and especially recently when we look at the global economy as it's been built from World War II onward, although the history runs much deeper than this, we can see that there has been a particular what's called a neoliberal agenda, which is the agenda of removing regulatory constraints on markets to enable people to exploit other people and resources without any consequences. And we have built up a mythology, a story that just isn't true, about rational self-interest. This story that human beings are motivated basically by greed, and that the greedier people do the best things for society.
Trickle down.
Of course, all of the psychological and sociological research on human nature and human behavior shows that this is not how we are. But we have this mythology that drives a lot of our economic thinking.
Well, now we have somebody just recently picked for vice president, the vice presidential candidate, who actually espouses and idolizes Ayn Rand, who espouses this very theory you're talking about, this very way of behaving and thinking in the world, right?
Yeah, it's actually it's even worse than that. That we have a vice presidential candidate in Paul Ryan and a presidential candidate in Mitt Romney. Both people have made their success in the world doing the things that a typical psychopath would do. When you look at Bain Industries and all of the controversy that's arising around Mitt Romney's connection with it, what did they do through Bain? What was the business model of that company? The business model is pretty simple. You take a company that's having some kind of hardship, and you go in and you don't care at all about the impacts on people, so you lay a lot of people off, you shift the jobs overseas to places where there are not human rights or safe working conditions so that you can better exploit cheap labor, and then you make more money off of the quote-unquote loss of overhead in doing that. And so the word that's used for that is efficiency. We say we've made it more efficient, but what it's actually done is it's caused significant societal and human suffering so that a small number of people could make money off of it.
Well, not to make the, I'm always doing this, but sometimes I feel like these comparisons are true enough so that you can make them, even though people get upset when you make them. Another example, let's call it that. I won't make a segue directly from Romney and Bain, but another example of this kind of psychopathic behavior when it takes over a country or a government is the Nazis, right? Where everything was dedicated to an insane goal, but efficiency was important. In other words, do the trains run on time? Does the camp fill its quotas? You know what I mean? Are the tanks further enough into Belgium? Do we need to bomb some more to achieve our goals? That kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and actually, if you study the history of how the Third Reich rose to power in Germany after World War I, and you can see a very similar trajectory with the rise of Mussolini and corporate fascism in Italy after World War I. That what happened was a small group of people, in this sense, there are kind of two levels of small group. There's an elite group that maybe numbers in a few hundred, and then there's a portion of the population that's maybe 10 to 15% of the population. And then there's and these two groups, neither of them the majority, can be coordinated in a way that very small elite group can manipulate this 10 to 15% of the population. And this 10 to 15% of the population is what we normally call authoritarians, people who feel like they really have to fit themselves into a vertical hierarchy where they know their place and they have very clear definition of right and wrong, and they want a sense of control and order in the world because they feel great anxiety about not having it. And this small group of people is then mobilized to influence elections so that a democratic process can be used for a fascist regime to take power, which is what happened in both Nazi Germany and in Mussolini's Italy. And so in both cases, it was a democratic process that enabled a kind of psychopathic mindset to become the large cultural, the sentiment for the entire government of the country.
Well, let me read this paragraph, and then I have another question based on what you just said. By the way, if you just tuned in, we're listening to Joe Brewer, and he's director of a place called Cognitive Policy Works, and it's a Seattle-based consulting company. Do you advise companies, foundations? Who do you advise? Who do you consult for?
I have done a lot of work with international NGOs, labor unions, government agencies, and socially oriented businesses.
Okay. Okay, so here you write, the global economy we have today is built on a deep history of top-down hierarchies that promote domination and control. We can all see that, and it seems to be getting worse all the time. And then you say, there have been plenty of feudal lords warrior chieftains and violent dictators throughout the last 6,000 years of burgeoning civilization. And then you go into talking about corporate personhood and the history of that in the United States. My question is, it seems as if that is the history. What you're talking about here, it's the history of the recorded history of humanity. There are always these people. There have always been these people, and there will always be these people, right?
Yes.
So
that they are among us, and one of the points about drawing the line in time at about 6,000 years ago is that there's now a considerable body of research about hunter-gatherer societies that goes back through the last 200,000 years of human history.
And this is interesting. This is interesting, man. When you explain how that works, explain how the hunter-gatherers worked as opposed to later on how it changed.
Now, the hunter-gatherers. I should mention that if you really want to learn more about what I'm about to describe, the researcher to look at is follows some of the work of Christopher Boehm. He's a professor at University of California. Where is he at? He's in Southern California. I think University of Southern California.
How do you spell the last name?
Boehm is Boehm.
Okay, Christopher Boehm. All right.
Christopher Boehm, and he has a recent book that's come out called Moral Origins, where he takes his 35 to 40 years of experience studying primates. He worked with Jane Goodall studying gorillas and bonobos and chimpanzees, and then transitioned over to studying hunter-gatherer societies. So he's an anthropologist and a primatologist. And he has been keenly interested in this observation that every hunter-gatherer society has been egalitarian. And yet you look at gorillas, and gorillas have what is called an aggression dominance hierarchy. Mm-hmm. That means that the stronger males will physically dominate the other males to become the top of the pecking order. And that if you look at the other primates, and humans are technically a primate, so we're among them, you can see that we have some of that dominance tendency, mm-hmm. where we seek status, and it's more pronounced in males than females, but it's in the human species. Mm-hmm. But also that we have an amazing ability to form strong social cohesion that is fundamentally egalitarian.
But the very behavior of hunter-gatherers just for survival, you describe it in here, it rests completely on cooperation, or else they'd starve, right? But how does that describe how that works?
So think about it this way: there's a band of about 30 people, mm-hmm. and they are living in an environment that is rapidly changing, and they have to move around out in the open where there are large predators. And they have to move out in the open to find shelter, to find food. And one thing that's really essential for their survival during this time is access to protein-rich meat. Specifically, I'm talking about collecting large game, like taking down a mastodon, mm-hmm. or in today's parlance, shooting an elk, where you get a large amount of protein. Mm-hmm. So for this band of 30 people to be able to survive out in the savannas without the safety and protection of the forest, they have to be able to band together, and they have to cooperate to take down those big mastodons or those other large animals that would be too dangerous or too large to take down on their own. And so what ended up happening during that period of time where these hunter-gatherers were living in this situation is that it became absolutely essential for their survival that they be able to cooperate. And one of the biggest threats to cooperation was cheaters. So you think about it, if there are...
You said cheaters, you mean?
Cheaters,
okay.
Yeah. So if there are 10 hunters who all work together to take down a mastodon, this several thousand-pound animal, mm-hmm. and if one person is the chief hunter, and he's the one who made the kill, and after killing the animal, he comes back to the tribe and says, I'm more important than the rest of you because I provided this meat, so therefore I'm entitled to have more than you. Well, what that does is it creates division in the group. It creates an advantage for one over the others, and that makes it much harder for the group to cooperate.
So see, theoretically speaking, this group tracked down this thing, but everybody was involved. There were trackers. There were people who, let's say, scared it into one place or another by throwing rocks at it, and then everybody had their job equally, right?
Yeah, and also it was common practice for several thousand years to do things like have several people running through the bushes making noise in a line to scare the animals into falling over a cliff so that they could then the animals would be injured or killed by the fall, and it'd be much easier to harvest the meat from them. And so this doesn't necessarily just involve male hunters. You could have women involved in this in some cases. And what happens in this situation, and this is well documented now in studies of hunter-gatherer societies that are still alive today, that are still with us today, is that there is a very strong social taboo against cheating or against being a bully. And so if any person tries to cheat and take more for themselves, the rest of the group will shame them and humiliate them.
Mm-hmm.
They, in a more extreme case, they might ostracize them, meaning they'd kick them out of the group.
Mm-hmm.
If you're imagining on the savannah back in the days where there were all these big, dangerous animals, to be out away from the group is almost certain death.
Mm-hmm. So that's what they did, and we're going back tens of thousands of years in history, right?
Yeah, tens of thousands of years to hundreds of thousands of years.
Okay, so when did this kind of thing change, and why?
The point where it changed was it was correlated with the invention of agriculture.
Yeah.
What happened with agriculture was people were able to form settlements, and they could stay in one place. They had to move around to follow their food before, but now if they could grow their food, they could stay in the same place. And because they became increasingly efficient at producing food, that would mean that a smaller number of people could feed more people than the ones growing the food.
Mm-hmm.
You might have 10 farmers that can feed 100 people.
Yeah, so far I'm not seeing any lack of cooperation.
So the thing that happens, though, is that once you start to have differentiated roles, what is called in economics division of labor, is that you have some people that are growing food, you might have other people that are the literally the bean counters that are keeping track of how much grain is being produced,
mm-hmm.
or how many livestock there are, and you'd have this division of roles. And what happens then is that when you start having division of roles within a society, it becomes much more difficult to have egalitarianism. And also the population starts to grow larger. So it's much harder to use reputation as a way of controlling for bad behavior, because you might have more people in the society than anyone knows. And but here I'm kind of losing the track of. Let's say you have the bean counters, you have the people who do the planting, the people who do the reaping, the sowing, the gathering of the crops. Then you have the people who bring it to market. Why is it that all those people wouldn't be honored for their roles equally? I don't see where there's dominance or I don't see the layering or the hierarchy here yet. Yeah, the problem comes in that when there's a small band of people, and remember, there's this background existence of psychopaths. So if you have 30 people, there may be a psychopath in that group.
Yeah, so.
And when everyone has to cooperate, then it's essential that they keep the cheaters and the bullies, which would be the psychopaths.
Mm-hmm.
It's essential that they keep those people from being socially disruptive.
Okay.
But once you start to have a larger population and a more complex societal structure, it's much more difficult to contain those people.
And so just because of the larger numbers of people involved, right?
Both the larger numbers of people and the fact that there are different roles, because if there are different roles, you can start to divide people against each other.
So what you're saying then is that the human race is in the place it's in right now, and it's in a pretty bad place, but it's absolutely natural and inevitable because of the expansion of the way human beings grew up, the way they cultivated the earth, and the number of people involved. In other words, there was no escaping this, right?
Yeah, I would say that that the pathway that we've been on of increasingly growing our empires, having conquests, spreading out and subjugating and enslaving other people, which has been the norm for this complex civilization model over the last 6,000 years,
mm-hmm. is
something that we should expect. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the only model for complex society. It's just the only one we've had up until now.
But so what you're talking about then is almost a kind of an idealistic hope rather than any evidence. Like I was going to ask you, for instance, if there is any society right now in the world, or let's say within the last 100 years, you can point out, even if it's on a small basis, that, and maybe that's the problem, that worked in a completely cooperative way. I could think of one offhand, some of the original and maybe even current kibbutzim in Israel, right?
Yeah, I would say I'd give two different examples.
Okay.
One example was actually the inspiration for the U.S. Constitution, and that's the Iroquois Nation.
Mm-hmm.
And the Iroquois Nation was a pretty complex society that was really a federation of tribal communities.
Mm-hmm.
So each tribal community kept people in check in the ways that hunter-gatherer societies have done since antiquity. But when they built their governing system, they embedded egalitarianism in it. And when the founders of our government were looking for models of governments to replace the British imperial model,
mm-hmm.
and this is Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, these people were studying different forms of government, and they were meeting with leaders of the Iroquois Nation. And so they got the idea of the tripartite government, which is what we call checks and balances.
Mm-hmm.
That came from the Iroquois Nation. That was not something that they got from a European governing system. They got it from the indigenous peoples
mm-hmm.
of North America. And that model was egalitarian. And one way that it was egalitarian was that there was no chief, there was no leader. Instead, there was a council of elders. And the council of elders would make decisions collectively, but they would make decisions in a way that was informed by their community members. And
but
so
but in the
egalitarianism.
But in the U.S. Constitution, all of that's pretty clear. But in the U.S. Constitution, we do actually have a president, right?
Yes, we do. Yes,
so
how
did that?
So it's a hybrid. It's an amalgamation of different models.
Mm-hmm. But
yeah. You can distinguish it with, we have an executive model with the president, which is different from a parliamentary government.
Right.
Where you have a prime minister who is elected from the cohort that's, the party that has the largest representation within the parliament. And so one of the things is that the United States has one of the earliest modern democracies, and you could even make the argument that we don't even have a modern democracy, because the parliamentary systems and the multi-party systems were invented after people saw the flaws in our two-party executive.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, because clearly some of the ways that those work are far more democratic. They're certainly instantly in touch with groups of people than ours are.
And I said I was going to give two examples of societies that have figured this out. And one is the Iroquois Nation, and the other is the social democracies of the world today. I wouldn't say they've gotten it perfect, but if you look at places like Holland or Finland, Denmark, and you see that they have a lot of egalitarianism in their societies.
Mm-hmm.
They have less income inequality, much more gender equality, and they have shared prosperity across their society. And the way they do that is that they combine the best elements of socialism, which is that you build societal infrastructure to support people,
mm-hmm.
and that's things like nationalized health care and universal education, those sorts of things. But then you combine it with a market-based economic system that is heavily regulated.
Mm-hmm. So basically, but then there must be, aside from those two things, there's a certain there's a kind of something in the bone marrow of certain countries. Like, for instance, I guess in those countries, they don't glorify or reward or even idolize greed, the achievement of great wealth and power like we do here, right? So there are different kinds of people over there.
Well, I'd say there are both different kinds of people and different kinds of cultures. And the diversity that we see in the world comes from the fact that we have both. So the United States is a very diverse country, both culturally and in terms of the diversity of psychologies of people.
But this idea of, for instance, I read an interesting quote, or somebody quoted, perhaps it was, a paraphrase of John Steinbeck, right, who was as close as you're going to get to a major American writer who was a socialist, if not actually a communist, right, in his leanings, when you look at Grapes of Wrath. And he said that one of the problems with America, why there wasn't a revolution, and some people still wonder with the way that people are treated in this country, why there isn't more of an outrage against the people who own and run the country, who are clearly psychopaths. But he said that one of the problems was, he didn't explain why it was or what would become of it, but this is what he said, and I'm paraphrasing. He said that during the Depression, millions of poor people, who if you adjust for inflation would be almost tens of millions now, millions of poor people did not see themselves as poor so much as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. The point being that there's something in America where everybody believes that it's okay to be rich because one day you could be rich too. So don't begrudge the guy for being outrageously rich. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's a real phenomenon that we celebrate this concept of luxurious wealth, and we celebrate this notion of rugged individualism.
Mm-hmm. American exceptionalism.
American exceptionalism. When you look back in our history, we had manifest destiny, the idea that God actually bequeathed us as the chosen people to destroy all local cultures and take their resources, because it's not theirs, it's ours.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we should take over the entire North American continent. It's ours. God gave it to us. And you think of the kind of grandeur of thinking for someone to say that we were chosen to take everything for ourselves, regardless of the impacts on someone else. And
grandeur is a polite word for it.
Yeah, and it's a phenomenon that you can think of at the cultural level, that there are mythologies and stories that celebrate it and that evoke specific examples of, identities for being it. So you could say you could be a John Rockefeller, or you could be a Bill Gates, you could be a Steve
That's
Jobs.
Right. The whole idea is that anybody could be when I was going to school in the 50s, they used to tell you anybody could be president, which of course is ridiculous. And of course now it's worse than ever. Now the only people who can be president are people who either are millionaires or who are very much supported by millionaires, if not actually billionaires. But they will tell you, and I think most Americans still believe this, and maybe a lot of people listening right now, that if we are lucky or we work hard or we know the right people, something or other, we could be multimillionaires. And it happens all the time. Somebody, especially these days, where some nerd, maybe in Brooklyn, who's 31 years old, comes up with an app and suddenly they have $100 million. Somehow this keeps the crazy ball rolling in this country. So here we have, to bring it up to the modern times, we have basically millionaires constantly running against each other, if not almost billionaires or backed by billionaires. And like you point out in your article, in Citizens United just popped the whole thing. That was the last nail in the coffin. But you've got Mitt Romney, who has $250,000 at least, pays hardly any taxes. You've got Ryan, was born rich, not rich, but born almost rich. And they've got this attitude that people can just drop dead if they don't really work hard and make it on their own without help from anybody else. And they are going to wind up getting at least 50 million votes. Why would people vote for people like this?
Well, there's this really interesting body of research by a psychologist at New York University named John Jost.
John Jost.
Jost, Jost. And John was interested in the question of when there is any kind of marginalization of one group of people, psychologically, how does that get perpetuated? And so the name of this theory that he developed is called system justification theory. Why do people justify the systems of oppression that oppress them? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he discovered as he started conducting research is that there's not a single mechanism. There are at least 20. And one of these mechanisms, the way that they work, is that they evoke an identity that has a relationship between the dominator group and the oppressed group.
Give me an example, because it's hard to follow the abstract thought sometimes.
Yeah, a really great example of this is how inner city black youth, say, African-American young men, and this is maybe a little bit less of an issue than it was 20 years ago, but I think it's still a very strong issue, is that a lot of these young African-American men have internalized negative stereotypes mm-hmm. of themselves that are actually defined relative to a positive stereotype of an affluent white young man. Mm-hmm. And so it's not that they want to be the white guy. It's actually more subtle and more insidious than that. It's that they actually live out a stereotype that is negative and harmful to them, so they're not able to be successful. Mm-hmm. And this could be because they don't have very many positive role models in their community, which could be driven by any number of social or economic causes. But when they internalize that kind of gangsta thug stereotype, what they're doing is they're adopting a negative view of themselves that is actually defined in contrast to a positive stereotype of the rich, successful guy on the outside.
Well, let's bring it back to just say when we're talking about voting for national candidate, you're going to get, like I said before, you'll get 50 odd million people voting for Mitt Romney, who is essentially a form of a psychopath, if not actually his charming buddy now, Batman and Robin. They're kinds of psychopaths. They idolize, certainly. What's his name? Ryan idolizes Ayn Rand, who is essentially the goddess of psychopaths. Now, why would 50 million people who are trapped in the swamp that these people created, they're in the quicksand that was created by the very people they're going to vote for, and they're going to sink even deeper in the quicksand and get robbed even worse, and yet they will keep voting for these people? Maybe you just explained it, but I still don't get it.
Yeah, well, the answer is, there's not a single answer, but I can kind of lay out a sketch of how it all works. Part of it is that people vote for candidates based on shared identity and a resonance in values.
Mm-hmm.
So when they see a candidate, they're like, that person's like me, they feel the way I do, there's someone I can identify with. And so if they don't identify with that person, and this is a great example of John Kerry in 2004.
John Kerry, right?
Yeah, John Kerry was not someone that really exuded an emotional and moral character that people related to in the way that he presented himself.
Well, but then you're talking about style versus content. I mean, he may not have presented that, but on the other hand, he was far more moral and far more brave, in fact, considering the Vietnam War and everything else, than the man he was running against, who was, in fact, an elitist coke sniffer who avoided the draft.
Yeah,
and yet people said, "Oh, I'd like to have a beer with him," so they vote for him. What does that say about the public?
Yeah, and this shows just how powerful perception can be. When people perceived John Kerry to be weak, and I think a major reason why they perceived him to be weak is that when his character was attacked, he didn't fight back. And when he didn't stand up, when he was being swift-voted, we didn't see that courageous fighter defending his honor, which is something that people in the South and people in the Midwest culturally would say that the way I like to describe it, because I'm from Missouri, is if someone called my mother a whore, I've got to punch him in the face.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, listen, that's a national that spreads nationally. You don't have to worry about Missouri, but that could happen when I walk out the building tonight. You know what I mean? But
yeah, and so basically, John Kerry was being called a whore, or his mom was being called a whore, and he was just saying, I'm not going to lower myself to that level of argument.
So in other words, then the bulk of Americans brought up in a certain way or looking at things in a certain way said, well, then he's just cowardly.
Yeah, and so he actually put himself into that stereotype, even though we know that the guy was a war hero.
Yeah, he volunteered to go someplace, got into a fight, and got a medal. Whereas the other guy, who people who puts a flight suit on, lands on a ship, and hangs around with generals, declares wars, gets people killed. He's the tough guy when he avoided the draft and was a coward himself.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see that that the dynamics involved here are subtle and complex. There's a lot going on, but the basic thing is that we can rule out certain things. It's not self-interest. Because if it was self-interest, people would see that their condition would get worse when they would vote for these people. And they don't see that. That doesn't change their behavior at all. So it's not self-interest. It's not rational, meaning it's not based on reason and logic. If it was based on reason and logic, people would say George Bush was a draft dodger. How could he be a war hero? And the logic would prevail.
What else is it? What else is it not besides those two things?
Another thing that it's not is it's not. Interestingly, I just said it's not rational. I'm also going to say it's not irrational, meaning it's not just craziness, it's not just stupidity.
Well, you're going to have to really prove that one to me.
Well, it's actually pretty simple. The way I'd say it is, first let me give an example in another context, and then I'll make my point.
Yeah.
If I am out in the jungle and a tiger jumps at me, and I get scared and my adrenaline gets pumping and I jump out of the way, that's a perfectly reasonable and intelligent thing to do. Even though it was not based on a conscious calculation, it was based on a deeply emotional impulse.
Okay.
And that emotional impulse is in me because from an evolutionary perspective,
survival.
Those of us who jumped out of the way of tigers lived and those who didn't got eaten.
Right.
And so when we look at the way that people respond in politics, and we see that they're responding based on emotional reasons. And one of the emotional drivers that's really powerful is people want to protect their worldview.
Their worldview.
And you think about it, when you have a worldview, you have an idea of how the world is. It could be, and you could also say a belief system. So you have a belief about how the world is, the way it was created, what's right and wrong about it. And there's information that comes along that calls your worldview into question. That will create quite a lot of anxiety.
But so it is complex and it's contradictory. For instance, based on what you just said right before that, you've got two tigers there. Let's put Obama aside for a moment, him and Biden. I don't even want to, but let's take Romney and Ryan. Basically, you got two tigers who are actually campaigning. Maybe they're lying to people. They are lying to people all the time. They're essentially tigers. And it just amazes me and infuriates me sometimes that the people who are going to vote for them are people who are going to get eaten by them after they vote for them. That's not what happened to the survival instinct.
Well, the thing is that they are actually being told a story that's, you could call it a masked truth. Like, take Fox News and all of the ways that they mislead people.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the claims that they make, as an emotional level, there's actually some truth. So they'll talk about the liberal agenda and how corporations, or not how corporations, they'll talk about the liberal agenda, and they'll say the government can't be trusted because these people are trying to hurt you in various ways.
So in other words, people can be deceived even against their own survival instincts.
Yes.
Well, you know what? I'm having such a good time having a conversation with you. I forgot to even take a break, and it's a bad time to take it because we're almost at the end of the hour. So we have a couple of minutes left. Maybe you could explain how it is, and we only do have like about 3 minutes at the most, how we can make use of psychopaths in our society, since they're always with us, like the poor are always among us, Jesus said, but the psychopaths are always with us. How do we control and make use of them rather than get eaten by them?
The basic approach is very simple to state. It's harder to do, but it's basically this. We have to establish cultural and institutional protocols for being cooperative. And so people who do bad things to others, we need to have cultural sanctions that will stop those people from doing it.
I thought we had that. It was called the Ten Commandments. It's called common decency. Didn't we have that?
Well, the thing is that there's been a lot of manipulation of it, and there's been a lot of dismantling of it. So a great example of this is the way that Rush Limbaugh has had free reign to just be kind of a jerk and a bully and throw his weight around and say awful things for years. And society at large was not putting a stop to it. They weren't putting their foot down and saying, we're not going to tolerate this kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But then this spring, when he took that young woman
right.
who was standing up for women's rights, and he called her a prostitute, and he said that if she was going to use birth control, he wanted her to basically make porn videos so he could watch. Said these completely unacceptable things. And
so we have to increase that kind of response, which was effective, like that kind of boycott in our whole society of people who are like this, right?
Yeah. Said simply, when there's a bully, you call the bully out and you shame them.
Mm-hmm.
If you shame the bully, they will stop.
Well, sometimes.
And the thing is, in an extreme case, you shame them, and shaming can take different forms. One is you just don't sanction them. You don't reward them, and they get socially punished, which means they get a bad reputation.
Or maybe you actually put them in jail where they belong.
Yeah, or you can ostracize them, which in this case would mean putting them in prison. And in an extreme case, with, say, a serial killer or a sociopath who's very violent, you might actually need to, if not put them in prison, you might actually need to execute them, which is what was done in hunter-gatherer societies, although very rarely.
Well, and I do. So I hate to say this, but we, because we're talking, but we do have like just only a few seconds left. So if you wanted to somehow wind it up, but where can people contact you to get more information or read more about what you do?
Well, the easy thing is go to my website, cognitivepolicyworks.com. That's COGNITIVE policyworks.com.
Okay.
And they can read some of the articles there, and they can contact me to ask questions.
All right. Unfortunately, we do have to stop because I've got to fit in a commercial message here. And I appreciate it. I know this kind of subject, we could go on and on, but we can't. It's
a big topic.
Yeah. Okay, Joe Brewer, and who will bring us hope that the psychopaths in our midst can be controlled, and let's hopefully before November. All right, thanks a lot, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
Okay. Let us go to break so that we don't disestablish and overthrow the entire economy of Sirius. And this is, once again, Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. Let me remind you again, I'm going to have a book reissued, a book I published once, a book of short stories. It's going to come out again in September, and I want everybody who's listening to get on my mailing list so I can let you know when it comes out exactly. And so you go to my website, Feder Files, FEDERFILES.com, and sign up to be on the mailing list so I can let you know. Also, check out this other thing I do called, it's on Facebook. So Google Facebook and Occupied Territory, and you can put my name in and that'll do it. Facebook Occupied Territory, and it's sort of an ongoing political discussion that we have when I'm not on the radio here. For this hour, also, I want to mention one other thing. I'm going to keep Roger, our guest Roger Bybee, waiting too long. There's other ways. Now, apparently, this show is being rebroadcast. See if I can get this right. The show is rebroadcast on this station, that is to say, Sirius XM Left 127, on Monday mornings from midnight to 3, and I'm sure you're all up then. And on Left Plus, there's something called Left Plus. By the way, Left Plus is if you listen on the internet or mobile apps, iPhones, iPads, Androids, whatever, robots. You can hear the show rebroadcast on Left Plus Sundays from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Also, there's something, I think this is also on, there's something called On Demand, which is probably through your mobile apps and through your computers. I'll have to get more information about this. But you go to your Sirius XM app on your iPhone, for instance, and you have a choice of the last 4 shows, I think, that I did. So in case you missed one or you want to hear it again. So there's more chances to hear this show. Okay, for now, what we're going to do for this hour is, obviously, the news this week, or some of the news this week, that might even make a difference in our personal lives, perhaps, is that Congressman Paul Ryan, Ayn Rand's illegitimate son, has been nominated, or chosen, I should say, by Mitt Romney as his vice presidential running mate. So he's his mate now. And for this hour, what we're going to do is we're going to pretend it makes a tremendous difference, that it's going to make a tremendous difference in our day-to-day lives, which person you vote for. So just for fun, we're going to pretend that. And then we're going to talk to Roger Bybee, who's here right now. Hi, Roger.
Hey, how are you doing, Mike?
Okay, it's been a little while. I'm going to read your a little bit of your bio, and if you want to correct me or add something, just feel free after I'm done, okay?
Okay, sure.
Okay. Roger Bybee is a writer. He's based in Milwaukee, who has specialized in writing about healthcare reform and economics for national publications like Z Magazine, The American Prospect, Dollars and Cents, In These Times, and several other publications and websites. And he blogs on labor twice a week for InTheseTimes.com. And let's see, he contributes to Progressive, American Prospect, Foreign Policy and Focus, and the Progressive Populist. And he edited the weekly Racine, Wisconsin labor newspaper in his hometown of Racine, Wisconsin for 14 years, and was active in labor community struggles to stop plant closings. And did you want to add anything?
No, that pretty much covers it. I would just add that where my hometown is squarely in Paul Ryan's district, and it is one of the towns that he has so ruthlessly neglected during his time in office.
Interesting. So you really, and you have written many articles about him over the years, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Where can people find those articles?
Well, I have a web page. They type in Roger Bybee plus Z space. Most of the articles are there, and I have.
Bybee is spelled Bybee, right?
Right.
Okay.
And then I have new articles online this week for the Progressive Magazine online and for In These Times Magazine online.
On Ryan?
Right. One of them is called Paul Antoinette Ryan for the Progressive, and then the In These Times article is called Paul Ryan's High Threshold of Pain for the People in His District.
So when you say Antoinette, is that his actual middle name, or is that Let Him Eat Cake?
That is in reference to Marie Antoinette.
Okay, Let Him Eat Cake.
And Let Them Eat Cake.
Okay.
And
in other words,
it has to do with his political record and personal politics.
And the context for that is that quick history lesson. during the right around the time of the French Revolution, right before the French Revolution, when people were literally starving to death in the streets by the hundreds of thousands, had no place to live, were starving, disease-ridden, the nobles eating everything up and living on everything that belonged to everybody else. Someone, this isn't a story, someone came to Marie Antoinette, who was actually originally an Austrian or a German princess married to King Louis, whoever, and said, the peasants are starving, and she's there surrounded by all her courtiers and, about 50 tons of pigs and everything else. And she said, why don't they eat cake? Let them eat cake. So that's Paul Ryan. So let's start off with Mr. Ryan. Maybe you can give me some background on him in terms of his political career.
Sure. Basically, he comes from a patrician family in the town of Janesville, Wisconsin, which is a town of about 60,000 people and a very solidly middle-class town until recently. But he comes from one of the three top Irish clans in the family and was quite wealthy. He went to, after graduated from high school, where he was both voted prom king and brown noser of the class.
He was voted brown noser of the class?
That's right.
So he was already winning elections, right?
No, well, he won the election for prom king, and okay. Then he also won the choice of brown noser of the year.
Okay.
But in any case, then he went to Miami of Ohio, where he fell under the influence of a professor who was a hardline Ayn Rand fanatic, and this happened not too long after the death of Ryan's father, and this guy became kind of a father figure. And then after Ryan's graduation, he was passed along from one influential right-wing politician to another, including Senator Robert Kasten of Wisconsin, William Bennett, the professional moralist and professional gambler, Jack Kemp, Senator Sam Brownback of Kansas, and about the only actual private sector experience, and this is a guy, of course, who always praises the private sector and disparages anything to do with the public sector, but almost everything he's done has been on the government payroll. But he did serve briefly as a driver for the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile, which is a 40-foot-long hot dog phallic symbol of a vehicle, and he drove that around Wisconsin.
So basically, most of his adult life, he's lived off our tax dollars, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So when he first got elected, what term is he in now? Sixth term?
Seventh
term. So he got elected
1998.
Okay, and he must have been very young when he was elected.
He was 28, and it was just an outstanding opportunity for him. The Democrats were exceedingly disorganized in the district, and that's not only been the case subsequently, but President Obama, over the last few years, has made some complimentary remarks about Ryan being a real thinker, somebody that he can talk with. And the Democratic Party has kind of nationally neglected the district despite the kind of politics.
Looks like we lost the signal, right? I don't know what that is. Can you hear us? I don't know. We lost the signal. We better try to dial him up again. Okay, we're going to try to dial him up again. So this is important to note, though, that Paul Ryan, if you look up on Wikipedia or something like that, you can get more details about it. But Mr. Ryan, who has got all kinds of plans for the poor and the middle class, which is to say let them go drop dead, grew up rich. Remember that now. This is a rich boy with another rich boy. Mitt Romney was a rich boy. He was a millionaire's son, and Ryan grew up rich too. So you got two rich boys who've been rich all their lives, making economic plans about all the rest of us. They never had to work their way up to anything. All right, we're back. I don't know what happened there, Roger, but we'll try again.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
And you're exactly right, and you're exactly right both about Ryan's background and about his attitude. Basically, he talks a lot in many speeches, including a couple that I've heard, about the importance of not having Americans let the safety net turn into a hammock.
Mm-hmm.
Implying that somehow poor people and working people are in danger of having it too easy and losing the incentive to work. And it's really stunning coming out of his mouth, given, first of all, what he's done to generate widespread poverty and the loss of family-supporting jobs in his district and across the nation. And second of all, his votes against vital programs that people need, like food stamps, a rise in the minimum wage, more help with fighting home foreclosures.
He's opposed all that, right?
Right, and expansion of the S-CHIP healthcare program, as well as, of course, the flawed but still useful Democratic healthcare plan, the Affordable Care Act.
It's just leave Romney alone for a second because he's so obvious. But a guy like Ryan, who appears to be so genial and friendly, and apparently is legendary in getting along with crowds, even hostile crowds. But for a man to dictate to the American people and then be in a position where maybe one day he'd be president, or at least he'll be driving an economic policy where
right,
he's telling people...
From driving the Wienermobile to driving the White House.
Well, I don't know about the Wienermobile, but it's outrageous that a person who did not in any way ever have to work for a living and virtually never really did work for a living except to suck off the public teat is telling other people who have had to work for a living and know what it's like what to do and how to live their lives.
No, it is really stunning because, as you said, he is actually a very amiable and charming person, and I've seen him in front of hostile crowds. He is, however, a very careful manager of his media contacts. For some articles, I tried a number of times to interview him and was unable to. And one time I confronted him after he gave a speech at a Martin Luther King Day event, and even though that he had time to talk with me, he would not talk with me and tried to palm me off onto his staff, whom I had already spent a lot of time talking with. So that's how he operates, to try to really manage his image as a man of the people, a guy who can talk with blue-collar voters about hunting and being an exercise buff and being a heavy metal music fan. He's a fan not only of Led Zeppelin, but of the band Rage Against the Machine, which is so ironic because their sympathies are so much with the kind of people that Paul Ryan is running roughshod over, the people who in Janesville, Racine, Kenosha have lost their jobs, lost their homes, their families are breaking up.
But they must blame that on Democrats because they keep electing him. Why do they keep electing him?
Well, one key thing is, first of all, we don't want to ignore his very considerable political talent. But first of all, he had from 1998 to 2010, he had a combined 30-to-1 funding advantage over his Democratic opponents. So that he basically vaporized them into non-existence. He had so much money coming to him from Wall Street, the drug companies, the health insurance companies, that he just made his opponents non-existent, and the Democratic Party didn't do anything to change that. And then finally, I would say that there's been a lack of a clear counter policy on the part of the Democrats. For example,
what's new?
The single most traumatic event in the history of Janesville, the hometown of Paul Ryan, was the closing at Christmas 2008 of the General Motors plant that had operated there for 90 years.
Wow.
So 3,000 jobs were lost directly at GM, but then there was also 3,000 jobs lost at supplier plants. Now, what happened in Janesville? Well, one effect was that within 3 months, the number of women seeking shelter because they were being battered tripled within 3 months. Then the pace of home foreclosures kept climbing, and the last time I looked at it, the number of foreclosures in the county in which Janesville is located quadrupled. Now, went up 4 times since 2000, and is continued to run at a very high pace. The food pantries, the homeless shelters have been swamped. The free clinic or low fee clinic in Janesville called HealthNet had a 77% increase in the number of clients in just a 2-year period, I think from 2008 to 2010. So there's been these enormous needs in Janesville.
All of this happening while he was their congressman.
Right.
Okay,
and
so why didn't he get blamed for that?
Well, because he made some token statements of sympathy, and he did vote for the auto bailout, although since then he has voted against every program that would help people to survive. Now, the thing I want to point out, though, is that the Democrats, with their auto bailout, did not establish conditions so that jobs would stay in plants in America, as in Janesville. So as a result, General Motors has doubled the number of cars it's bringing in from Mexico, China, and Korea.
So
since the auto bailout.
So they're doing well, but not Americans.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And then also within Ryan's district, in the town of Kenosha, there's an auto plant where my grandfather worked for 33 years, and generations of people have worked there. There's been a century of automaking in Kenosha, and that ended though because of the auto bailout. Ironically, what happened was that Chrysler took the money it was given and used it to move the last 850 engine jobs from Kenosha, Wisconsin, to Saltillo, Mexico, where they built a new, very low-wage plant where if a union is tolerated, it's a company-run union. And that all occurred in the name of saving the auto industry and saving jobs. So I think one real problem that it's important for liberals and progressives to realize is that President Obama and the Wall Streeters that he appointed to the auto bailout program did not fight for the interests of American workers and American communities. It was like fighting to save the GM and Chrysler labels, but not the workers. It was, or look at it like saving a ship by tossing the passengers overboard.
No, you get a place like Janesville. People obviously had to and probably still have to survive on unemployment and other kinds of welfare benefits. And is it Ryan is clearly the kind of person who has always voted against that, right?
Right, and he's in an incredibly influential position as House Budget Chairman, and he's opposed, as I said, food stamps, a rise in the minimum wage, help with foreclosures, the S-chip healthcare program that would have allowed more people to get coverage at a time when more and more people were losing it. And as a result, you've had the average wage in Janesville has fallen by about $5 an hour.
$5 an hour?
Right, from over basically close to $24 an hour to $18.82 an hour. The number of suicides in the town doubled between the end of the General Motors plant and the next 2 years. So the town has really been devastated. There's been a few new jobs that have come in, all of them government subsidized. And
that's interesting.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, consider his attitude towards government. Maybe we could, maybe what you could explain is, what is the Ryan economic plan? I mean, it's a big question, but maybe you could somehow briefly outline what his general plan is for the budget. In other words, income, outgo, what he spends money on, what he won't spend money on, where he sees money being raised, where he sees money being spent.
Well, essentially, Ryan has cultivated the reputation of being a so-called deficit hawk, saying that the federal budget deficit is our biggest enemy, and we needn't worry about stimulating the economy as we did during the New Deal when we ran a deficit, and then because of the programs adopted by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in World War II, we got out of the deficit and got into positive economic territory again because the economy was revved up and running strongly. Mm-hmm. But Ryan doesn't believe in that. What he believes in the name of deficit cutting, is cutting programs that benefit poor and working people and pouring the money into the military and into tax breaks for the very wealthy. Like, for example, his plan calls for giving a $300,000 a year tax break to people earning over $1 million.
And the reason for that is because those people, in some daydream he has, and other people like him, those people will then, with the money they save, employ other people, right?
Right, and of course, nothing could be more ridiculous, because corporations and the richest 1% are sitting on $3 trillion in unspent savings at this point, and so much of it is stashed offshore. But they have a record amount of savings that they're not reinvesting in America. So they hardly need more money at this point.
Does Mr. Ryan have offer any actual proof that that letting them have more money or not taking money from them actually helps the general economy? I mean, where could he get proof? Does he have proof?
Well, he essentially has a kind of quasi-religious faith that he acquired from reading Ayn Rand and others like her, like Milton Friedman. Mm-hmm. And not only does he propose tax cuts for the corporations and the wealthy, and cutting Medicare so that it becomes a voucher program that covers less and less of the health care needs of senior citizens. Mm-hmm. But he also and this is something that's gotten very, very little coverage considering its significance. He proposes eliminating taxes on all foreign operations of U.S. corporations. Now think about that. Think about the kind of incredible incentive that would be to move every possible job out of America that you can move in terms of manufacturing, in terms of a lot of professional jobs. If you're moving it to a country that has low wages and you're paying no U.S. taxes ever, I mean, it's just an astonishing incentive. But for some reason, the Democrats have not brought that up, nor have the media paid attention to it.
Why haven't they brought it up?
Well, I think all along the Democrats, for the most part, with honorable exceptions, people like Marcy Kaptur and Sherrod Brown and a few others, and then, of course, the independent Bernie Sanders, so many of them basically buy into a modified version of trickle-down economics. They want, they believe essentially that the number one focus of government has to be creating a good business climate, but they also believe in compensatory programs for the jobs that are lost, whereas the Republicans believe in no compensatory programs, just let people make it on their own.
So basically, it's the same old answer to the same old question. You got the Democrats and the Republicans, let's say almost all the Republicans, if not every one of them, and maybe 80 to 85 to 90% of the Democrats. The reason that they're in favor of things like this, at least one reason is, whatever else justifies it for them, is that these are the very people that they want to reward, the rich people who actually keep them in their jobs, right?
Exactly.
And you don't. I don't.
What you have is a situation where roughly 80% of the money in federal elections comes from 1/3 of 1% of the population, and that's a dated figure, and things are getting much worse.
Oh, with Adelson, it's got to be
of the Citizens United decision. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, with Adelson, it's got to be, talk about a finger on the scale. You know,
right?
With this,
Exactly. So you have the Democrats as well as the Republicans taking it easy on Wall Street as they did with the much discussed Dodd-Frank bill on finance. One of the business reporters on public radio recently said, "Geez, what they should have done is having a 37-page bill like the Glass-Steagall Act that was passed in the Depression and didn't have any loopholes instead of a 2,000-page bill filled with loopholes." And I could cite lots of examples like that with the Democrats. And then you also have the fact that in the 2008 election, labor unions were outspent by corporations in terms of campaign contributions by a 15-to-1 margin at the federal level. So with that kind of imbalance being tipped even more heavily toward corporations by the Citizens United decision, we really have a danger of democracy being totally hollowed out. And we saw a sample of that in Wisconsin, where Scott Walker had somewhere between 5 and 7 times as much money as his opponent. And in that kind of situation, you just cannot have a genuinely democratic election.
Well, let's take a break here. We do have to take one break. And when we come back, I want to get into the details of of let's say what's called cultural or moral issues like abortion and everything else, but then actual issues like war, the Defense Department, i.e. the War Department, Medicare and Medicaid. And we'll go over each of them specifically to see what would happen to the people who will benefit from that and who will lose from that. But we're going to take a break first, all right?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, you are listening to Roger Bybee, Bybee, who writes consistently and intelligently about all these issues, and in fact is based right smack in Paul Ryan's home state and his home territory, and knows more about him than almost anybody. So he's somebody to really look to when you want to know all about Ryan. Roger Bybee, Bybee, and you can Google him, and he's got places to go I'll tell you about later. Let's go to a break, and we'll be back. Okay, we're back with Roger Bybee. Now, Medicare is one of the most successful government programs which benefits a huge number of people that there has ever been in the American government. Now, what does Mr. Ryan want to do about Medicare?
What he proposed initially, and he softened this a little bit in order to supposedly give people an option between Medicare and getting health care through a private insurance program. But essentially what he wants to do is make Medicare into a program where people receive a fixed amount of benefits as opposed to an unlimited amount of benefits according to their needs in order for them to survive.
A fixed amount of benefits? I mean like per year?
Right. And as the amount of benefits would be set, and it would erode over time as inflation eats into it. And so there's a very, very grave danger that senior citizens will wind up paying as much as $6,000 or more in for health care benefits than they are now.
So let me get this straight. Let's say you have diabetes, or you have really crippling arthritis, or whatever it is, and you have to make at least sort of semi-regular visits to a doctor to be monitored. You have to take certain medicines, which may not be cheap. He will limit the amount of money you can spend on those things.
Right.
And if you need more of it, or if the situation gets worse, that's just too bad.
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly.
Uh-huh. Well, that's okay.
It's sort of analogous to the switch from defined benefit pensions where you know what you're going to get, to defined contribution where the company says, this is all I'm going to give you. And,
I see.
And that's what Ryan would effectively be doing, saying, this is all I'm going to give you, and if you need to pay more out of your own pocket, too bad.
Mm-hmm. Too bad. In other words, that's kind of an extension of that question that somebody asked Ron Paul during the debate. If a man doesn't have health insurance and he's mortally ill, essentially he just dies in a ditch, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay. All right. All right. So we're talking about Christian compassion here. What about so on Medicare? Is there anything else that he wants to do with that aside from the limited benefits?
Well, that is just huge right there, and what he's done to counter that is to claim that some $716 billion in savings that President Obama aims to get from Medicare via taking excess money away from health care providers, meaning hospitals and doctors, and transferring it back into health care so that it can aid seniors and aid other people who need health care. He's describing that as a theft of money from Medicare. And
but how is that a theft of money from Medicare? Because
it isn't.
Oh.
It isn't. It's a transfer of money from one healthcare pocket to another healthcare pocket, whereas Ryan would take money out of the healthcare pocket and essentially put it into tax breaks for the rich and continued military spending.
Well,
now, one thing that's been very much lost in the debate, is the public debate, and in its part due to the Democrats' lack of courage in pointing this out, that America maintains a military empire to support the corporate economic empire, so that we have over 750 bases in at least 130 countries.
Well, let me update that a little bit. The last thing I heard on Tom Dispatch, and I forget who wrote this, somebody who did several years of research, is that we're up to 1,000 bases now and counting.
It could well be, because the number of bases has been rapidly expanding in, for example, the former Soviet republics and so forth.
We just put 2,500 Marines in Australia.
Right, yeah, and all kinds of things that are really unnecessary in terms of our national security needs, as long as you maintain the notion that somehow Al-Qaeda is this cohesive military force that has like 1 million troops massed in one place.
Well, it's easy to see through all that if you have even the slightest brain at all. You can see that these bases are there to protect large corporations' profits, and
even Tom Friedman, the chief cheerleader for globalization, the author of The Lexus and the Olive Tree, and writes for the New York Times, and is wrongly seen as liberal and forward-looking. But at one time he said, well, McDonald's could not be all over the world without McDonnell Douglas and others backing them up.
Well, that's how it works,
And that's really true.
So that's Medicare. What about Medicaid?
Cuts there as well. I'm not sure of the exact size, but overall, of the budget cuts that Ryan has proposed and gotten passed through the House, 62% of the cuts would afflict middle income and poor Americans. That comes from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And
he wants to give block grants to states, right? In other words, he gives them a mass of money to be used any way they want.
Right, and of course, some states are much more democratic with a small d than others. And in other words, even with somebody as bad as Scott Walker running Wisconsin, and he's wanted to make cuts in Medicare for poor people, there's limits to what he can do in Wisconsin, whereas there's no limits to what somebody can get away with say, Bobby Jindal in Louisiana.
So they could take this block grant and they could spend it on salaries or anything for building a Capitol building, right?
Right, exactly, and so there's no guarantee. There's no way of real public accountability, because especially the way the campaign finance system is evolving, the richest 1% is really becoming the ruling 1%, and our policy options are getting narrower and narrower.
So what about now? There's a lot of people, including myself. There are, I don't know what, tens of millions of people who are receiving Social Security benefits and who really need them. The harder things get in the economy and the less jobs there are and the less you can, find any money, the more important it gets. And of course, there's no cost of living raise. It doesn't keep up with rent or food, but nevertheless, it's a check you get and people apply it to try and get by. What does he want to do with the Social Security fund?
let's see. On that, I know that, first of all, he was a big advocate, one of the biggest champions of George W. Bush's effort after the 2004 election to push for total privatization of Social Security accounts.
So how would that work? I mean, what would that mean?
In other words, you would have a personal account where you would make decisions as you do with an IRA account about where the money is invested, and studies have shown that the average person doesn't know how to invest their money and makes poor choices because they don't have the time or the technical expertise
or the insider knowledge.
Right, and that's an interesting.
We'll get to
because
that.
Because there's some question about whether or not Ryan used some insider knowledge he gained at a meeting with
Paulson,
the head of the Federal Reserve, in 2008 to move some of his money around.
That's an interesting story. I mean, Paulson, the evening, a couple of hours before he made that announcement to Congress, and it became public, where the banks were going to look. He was announcing that the banks were just all going to die if we didn't give them away, hundreds of millions of dollars to them, billions of dollars, and also that Goldman Sachs would be in a position to eat everything up. There was a meeting that afternoon, or rather there was information that afternoon that got to people in Congress, and that very day, Paul Ryan somehow managed to dump bank stocks that very day and invest in Goldman Sachs. It's quite a coincidence.
Right, it is, and there's some in the financial communities that say that Ryan's decision was not in his hands, and it was strictly the result of
trading metrics,
an algorithm by which investments are made.
Yeah, bullshit.
But, it's an awfully strange coincidence, and I have to say it must be some algorithm that could account for that.
Well, I read a statistic that the members of Congress over the last 10 or 20 years, I think it's 20 years, have routinely made made a 15% profit on investments in Wall Street when professionals on Wall Street were making 5% profit.
Yeah, I mean that is one of the few halfway substantial reforms that Obama has enacted to end the use of insider knowledge by members of Congress, but
so in other words, the idea of investing Social Security money.
Yeah, and obviously what Ryan has done, as he has with Medicare, is to make that an option for people. But clearly, the stock market crash of 2008 shows that it's not a very good option, because if your investments crash, there is no safety net, and you're out there on your own. There isn't the kind of diversity of
right, of course,
that you have with the Social Security system.
Now the most bloated, obviously, so he wants to cut all this stuff to poor people. He does not want to increase taxes. He even wants to decrease taxes to the rich, who are sitting on trillions of dollars. Now, the most bloated part of the federal budget, which gets worse all the time, is the Department of Homeland Security, National Security Agency, the CIA, all these agencies, and the War Department, right? The Defense Department. We're talking about trillions of dollars. And what does he want to do about all that?
Well, basically, he wants to, in the same vein as Romney, wants to make America the unquestioned number one power in the world, which of course it is already. I mean, we spend far more on the military than basically all the other nations of the world combined.
So he wants to
like 3% of what we do.
So he wants to keep that up, and he wants to expand that, right?
Exactly.
So,
And of course, who benefits from that? It's major corporations like Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, et cetera, General Electric, and Caterpillar, and by the way, many of these same companies, which are having, with the exception of Boeing, having record profits, are very busy fighting very hard to drive down wages to the neighborhood of $13 an hour.
Yeah.
That's what
just happened
as the appropriate wage.
Look what just happened in Caterpillar. I mean, the workers got worn out finally arguing with them. Caterpillar made tremendous profits last year, and they're just trying to screw their workers, and they're getting away with it.
Right.
Well,
exactly.
So, we only have about 3 minutes left. One last question, and then maybe you can kind of sum up about him. How does he feel about this absurd, immoral, unwinnable war in Afghanistan? What's his point of view on there?
He's been an ardent hawk for every form of military action taken by the U.S. He supported the war in Iraq and Afghanistan right from the start, and so he would just he would just keep it going, it's part of benefiting the military contractors. It's in part benefiting the corporations who want to keep projecting American strength overseas.
But he'd tell you that there are hundreds of thousands of jobs at stake, and that's why he's doing it.
Well, yeah, and that is a response that we hear from far too many politicians who refuse to look at the possibility of other kinds of jobs and a kind of conversion of military plans into things that people need, like mass transit equipment and energy saving equipment, which are being made overseas. For example, the main manufacturer of mass transit rail cars is a Spanish company called Talgo.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Canadian company called Bombardier. Now, why couldn't American companies be making that?
I should tell you, we only have about a minute left. If you want to go ahead.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I think I made my point on that.
Yeah. So basically, I don't know what there is left to say, but obviously your point of view on Ryan is that basically he's putting on a congenial, boyish, friendly face and selling something to Americans, which they might appear to be buying, but basically he's looking to bankrupt and to make miserable everybody who's not rich. That's the way it sounds to me.
That says it very succinctly. And basically, if you look at his district, he has fought for policies that have destroyed jobs in the district. The deregulation of the financial industry, the bailout of the banks, the unconditional bailout of the auto industry. He's fought for free trade agreements that encourage the offshoring of jobs. Now he wants to eliminate all taxes on the foreign operations of U.S. corporations, which would be just the most stupendous incentive for offshoring even more of our productive base.
But I guess as far as the people who Romney is appealing to, he is more of a favorite of a Tea Party, Ryan. He's got the right attitude towards abortion for them, right attitude towards guns for them, right attitude towards war for them. So despite the fact that he will eat them all for lunch, they don't care because he's apparently saying the right things on their moral, cultural issues, right?
Right. He's very favorable on what Thomas Frank, the author of What's the Matter with Kansas, called election season issues. But those issues like guns and abortion have no longer been confined to the election season because what we're seeing across the country.
Oh, I should tell you, we only have literally half a minute left. So.
Okay, so we're seeing the Republicans, in lieu of coming forth with job creation programs with any credibility, they're putting forth restrictions on abortion and a woman's right to choose and women's health care.
One last shot here for 5 seconds. Tell people one place they can go to find out what you write.
Okay, the best place would be
real quick.
Type in quote Roger Bybee plus Z space Z space. And that'll get you to my website, and I have a lot of articles on.
Okay, we're back. The red light is on, so that means I'm on the air. And wouldn't you think it would be a green light, and then I'd be on the air? See, this is how strange radio is. I have right in front of me on the console here, it's called the console. This is stuff nobody's else going to tell you, right? This is like, this is a back of the room stuff. There's 4 lights. One says TB, and that is talkback. That means I could talk back to my engineer, but I don't need this because I'm not in a separate booth from him. You want to take notes? You could take notes on this. Right? Are you taking notes? Okay, talkback means that. And then cough is if I want to cough, instead of going like this on the radio, which is really gross, I would just go that, and you wouldn't hear it. That's a green button. Then there's a yellow button, which if I press it, I go off the air. So it's if I want to talk to somebody else or something like that. And then the red button, which is on the air. Okay, now you know that, and I'm sure that's fascinating. This is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. And once again, I remind everybody who's listening, please go to my website and join my mailing list because since I don't have enough money to buy commercials for myself, this is a commercial. I'm going to have a book coming out that came out once before. I'm reissuing a book with a new story added to a book of short stories in September, and I would like to get everybody who's listening here on the mailing list so I can send you a desperate plea to go buy my book, which actually won't be very expensive. It's going to be an e-book, which are much cheaper than regular books. And so go to Fader Files, FEDERFILES.com. And let's see, what else did I want to tell you? If you're listening on mobile apps, that is to say on iPhones, iPads, anything else, if you listen on your computer, I'm on something called Left Plus, which is a computer version. If you're listening an online version of Left 127. And then also the show is replayed. And if you want to find out when it's being replayed, you can check on the Sirius website. All right, so where are we? You've been listening to what we've been talking about. The election is almost upon us. The conventions, I should say, are almost upon us. I talked to somebody the other day who is in Tampa. Reverend Bruce Wright, his name is. You might want to check this guy out. He's on a place called Resist RNC. That's the Republican National Convention. ResistRNC.org. And it's a bunch of people who are organizing an Occupy movement type of encampment down there, and who are doing marches and who plan to do some civil disobedience at the convention, which will involve Jill Stein, who is running for president on the Green Party, who just got on the ballot, by the way, in Pennsylvania. So they're going to be doing protests and demonstrations down there in Tampa, and then we're going to try to find somebody we can talk to who's doing the same thing in Charlotte, where President Obama, Mr. Hope and Change, is going to be there with his other rich pals to sell you whatever it is he's selling. So the point being, in both of these places, there are so many city ordinances and rules that have been enacted in the last 6 months of the last year to keep people basically away from the conventions. And these conventions are, and then there's Department of Homeland Security. Get this now. This is your tax dollars we're talking about, right? You work. I work. They take money out of my taxes here. My engineer works. You work, right? And they take money out of his taxes. Most of you who listen to me work, right? You truck drivers, whatever you do, teachers, whatever. Take money out of your taxes, or you file your own taxes. You pay your taxes. You're not like Mitt Romney or whatever. Paul Ryan paid 20% of taxes, which is below the national average of what people take out of their, get taken out of their paychecks. Now, they take your taxes. The Department of Homeland Security basically is our sort of national security police, like the Gestapo was once. The Department of Homeland Security has given the city of Tampa and the city of Charlotte $50 million each of your tax money. Did you forget? Did they ask you about that? I think I didn't get the envelope about that to check that off. $50 million to each city to buy armored cars, drones, and to pay thousands of extra state and other local police to surround the convention. They say it's for terrorism purposes. Anybody with half of a brain understands it's to suppress dissent. In America today, look it up in the dictionary. Look up the word terrorist in the dictionary. The first synonym will be dissent. Second one will be protest. They don't. That is, when I say they, you know who I mean by they? The people who own and run the government, who are essentially the same people, depending on which party it is, doesn't make much difference. The people who own and run the government, Sheldon Adelson, Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, the Koch brothers. I know it's pronounced the other way, but I like saying it that way. The, Obama, the Penny Pritzker, the head of the Hyatt Hotels chain, who made Obama what he is. All these people who own and run the country, they equate protest and dissent, which is actually the basis of American freedom, the First Amendment of the Constitution, free speech. They equate that with terrorism now. And I'm not being, what's the word? I always get this word wrong. I'm not exaggerating. I'm really not exaggerating. Sounds like I am, but I'm not. The city of Tampa and the city of Charlotte have enacted ordinances which say, for instance, if you're carrying anything at all, like a backpack that has metal in it, if you're carrying a liquid container that's over a certain number of ounces, et cetera, if you're carrying a certain kind of food, which may in fact spread a noxious smell, they have figured out a way to write city ordinances to prevent anybody from going down to Tampa and Charlotte, even the people that live there or near there, from going there and getting anywhere near this convention where our rulers are getting together to select the next king, and we get to vote on who the next king is. They have effectively made those people marginal. Anything you do down there, so much as look funny in their direction, get within 1,000 yards of them, carry a metal bottle for drinking water in your backpack, they'll arrest you as a terrorist or put you in jail overnight anyhow for violating some city ordinance. $100 million has been spent to protect these people at the convention from terrorists. Terrorists? Really? And they have, for instance, listen to this, the city of Tampa, or is it Charlotte? I forget which. No, Tampa has leased a very large vacant lot, something like 2 or 3 blocks away from the convention hall, and called it a free speech zone. Get that? So you could go where they tell you to go to express your discontent, if not outrage, at the bullshit and the predatory behavior of both parties towards you as a person, as a citizen, as a voter. You can scream and yell all you want as long as you stay inside the vacant lot, which is 2 or 3 blocks away. Well, nobody will see you. And you can scream and yell so that you can hear it and so your buddy next to you can hear it. This is what they think of you, and this is what they think of you as a vote. But they want your vote. I don't know why they want your vote. How far away are we from these people? And you know what I mean, again, by these people. It's all the same. Doesn't matter what suit they're wearing, what party they're in. How long will it be before they just do away with all this silliness called voting and say, you know what, you don't really need to vote. We know that you know, and we know that you know who's in charge. You know, why keep up this game of picking one or the other? What's the difference? We're just you vote for one of us, and we'll just work it out down in Washington. You don't need to vote anymore. Don't you have something better to do? You could watch Teenage Mothers. My wife and I watched Teenage Mothers on TV last night. My wife said, let's watch some junk TV. And I said, okay, let's watch some junk TV. So we looked at the TV, and we found this. We took a trip to Maine last week, which is why I wasn't live on the air, which was a rebroadcast last week. Am I allowed to say that? I said it already, right? So anyhow, and we watched it. We sat in a motel room, right? And what are you doing in a motel room aside from you know what, right? But we're too old to do that. So hey, we so so anyhow, since we're not doing that, we're looking at junk TV. And what do we see on junk TV? We're watching reality shows. I have never seen a reality show before, right? I guess I was too involved in alternative reality, like voting, like living, like getting upset about the elections or the fact that I have no rights anymore. So I'm watching what most Americans watch. And what I thought, that if I thought before that Americans in general, as a mass, I say now, not of course you who are intelligent people, are beyond redemption, are so stupid and so ignorant and so trashy as to be beyond saving, that a democratic system where people are supposed to choose their leaders is in the hands of such people, might as well be in the hands of retarded giraffes, has been validated 100-fold by watching junk TV. I watched one show called Teenage Mothers, and there were other ones. I don't know. Women who wear orange jumpsuits and kill their mafia husbands, whatever the show is, right? How to trample your grandmother and take away her life savings. The one who does it the most wins. I couldn't believe how bad it really is. This country is stupider than even I thought it was. And I thought it was pretty stupid. So we're all going to get together and decide who's going to be king and who's going to be whatever, a vice king. So Paul Ryan, Joe Biden, Joe Ryan, Paul Biden, Barack Romney, whatever. $100 million the government is giving to protect the conventions from terrorists. The public, also talking about your tax money, they're spending $18.2 million. The federal government grants each political party $18.2 million for their convention expenses. That is only 1/3 of what it costs to put on a convention expense. This is a gigantic, what are these conventions? These are gigantic parties. You know how dentists have conventions in Hawaii, right? And they just go there. They go there, right, to learn about the newest drill they can use. Give me a fucking break. They go down there to have sex and drink and gamble and, to do things they wouldn't do ordinarily in their hometown. What are conventions for? Everybody knows what everybody goes. Are conventions for, right? You don't go there to learn anything. You go there to do what you do, right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So this gigantic party is taking place in Tampa and Charlotte. I can give you an example of this. There was a terrific article in the New York Times the other day. Maybe you can look for it online, although I don't know if the Times charges for access. But they interviewed a woman at a strip club who runs a strip club, i.e. a house of prostitution dance hall. So there's a lot of strip clubs in Tampa, right? And they do, a certain amount of business. They do pole dancing, quote unquote, pole dancing, right? Whatever pole they're dancing on or around. Guess what? They have booked extra girls at the strip clubs, and they have gotten in more pole dancers, quote unquote, and they're expecting boomtown business. The party of family values is already flooding in there, and they expect more and more people to keep flooding in. They don't even have the room to put these people in when they show up at the strip clubs and to use the prostitutes down there. So the Republican Family Values Convention is a guaranteed gold mine for the strip clubs down there. And the same thing's going to happen in Tampa. So this gigantic party where members of the Democratic and Republican Party are going to go, and you're paying them. Think of this now. Whoever the Democratic or Republican delegate is from your state, your tax money is paying them 1/3 of their expenses, to go down there and have a big party at your expense and go to a strip dancing club, right? A strip club, and go to a pole dancing club. How do you like that? You having trouble buying food, paying your rent? Don't worry about it. These guys down there are having a good time. And so, of course, they can't put on a show. They can't have a big party for $18.2 million. That's measly crap. So they need, guess what? Corporate money and lobbying money and money from big corporations like Duke Energy, which is the largest energy company in the country, right? And we all know what that means. They recently bought up another huge energy company. So now they've created a monopoly in a lot of places on the East Coast, down south, in the Midwest, Duke Energy, right? So they'll keep raising the price of energy no matter what it is you make, or if you lose your job, fuck you. Pay the higher bill or else the lights don't go on, you don't have any heat, whatever it is that you need electricity for. So Duke Energy is giving millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars to the Democratic Party in office space. They call it in-kind donations, right? Office space. They're giving them loans and everything else. And here's an amazing coincidence. Duke Energy gets hundreds of millions of dollars in grants and stimulus loans from the federal government. Isn't that an astounding coincidence? So all this dishonest, predatory bullshit is going on, and we're paying for it, and the corporations are paying for it. And what are we going to get back for it? What are we going to get from these two big parties they're having? We already know who's running for president. We know who's going to be the nominees. Why do they even need to spend public money on this? And you just watch on TV. If the TV at all will show you, if any major network or any major radio station has live coverage of the dissent and the protests, which may be allowed if people aren't beaten to death by cops or have hand grenades thrown at them or drones spying on them and arresting them before they even make it over there. If anybody even survives this, you'll never see the protest. God forbid. God forbid. This is what we've come to. This is a fascist country. It's a fascist country. It's a sickening place. And all right, so now I'll stop. If you've heard anything in the last couple of hours that you want to call about, now is the time to call. I'm urging you now to call. It's all coming down to it now. We have the two conventions, which are meaningless Roman circuses of bullshit that are happening. Meaningless circuses of bullshit. So if you're paying for it already, so you should already watch it. You know, like you think TV is free? Go watch the conventions. And you know why you should watch the conventions? Not because it might be entertaining or anything, because you already paid for it. You might as well watch it. You own these conventions. They took your tax dollars and gave it to the cops to beat people over the head, and they gave it to people to go to strip clubs and to jump up and down and get drunk inside of a convention hall. So you might as well watch it. You own it. You broke it. You bought it. Let's see. Let's take a couple of calls, but I got to have more people calling. I only got 2 people calling here. Listen, you know what? I'm 67 years old. I've been doing radio for 35 years. I don't want to be unhumble, but there's very few people who are better on the radio than I am. What do you think? You can't say anything because you work for other people too, right? So a few people. He knows a few people who are really good on the radio. Very good. You should run for president. But listen, I do a good radio show. I do an honest radio show. Elect me. But you got to call up. The only way I know that people are listening is if they call up. Now, you could disagree with me. That's fine with me. I might yell at you, but you have to be tough, right? Be an American. Don't be a pussy. Anyhow, so I got 4 people calling. Let's have more people calling. Number here is 866-997-4740. For the first 100 people that call me, you get nothing. Okay, Andrew from California, you're on the radio.
Hey, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you.
Hey, well, 2 things. First thing, I'm going to stroke your ego. I redid my Sirius subscription today so I could hear your show.
Well, that's nice.
The wrong car to work. I have it in my wife's car, but I don't have it in my car.
Oh, no.
On Saturday.
Well, okay.
You made your master some money. So, just kidding. They're not your master. Bad joke. And the second thing, is that we give up our freedoms for this kind of sense of personal safety or whatever, or comfort. Anytime anything happens, how do we do to stop this? How do we make sure that this doesn't happen again?
Right.
And so it just keeps ratcheting down our freedoms, to the point to where I have to be molested at an airport now.
Well, this, of course you're right, and it's worse and worse all the time. But, of course, there is a real threat out there. Look what they really did fly. Somebody flew some planes into some buildings and killed a lot of people, right? And there are real threats, but obviously the fascists, the dictators, the corporate owners, and the people that run the country have taken this and scared people to death with this, with this real possibility. They've scared everybody to death and use it to justify a true fascist takeover,
Well, I think, the saying is kind of stupid, but freedom isn't free. Things like that get, thrown around all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, our founding fathers were willing to die, and a lot of them did. And now we have, politicians aren't even willing to lose an election.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we've really gone a long way, down this rabbit hole. And until we're willing to accept a little bit of danger, I don't think we will be free.
It's an interesting point you bring up because it works the same way in people's lives psychologically. And I know that from my own life, and I still struggle with it. And I think a lot of people do too. Think of your own life. When you try to be safe all the time and have nothing change and to protect yourself, you wind up coated in a varnish, an increasingly thick varnish of your own fears and your own mythology. And this, you get to the point where you're so afraid of everything because you want to protect yourself that you never do anything new. And I know what I'm talking about, right? I've been frozen half my life. You don't do anything new because it could be dangerous. You don't try anything risky. You don't reach out in an emotional way or an intellectual way or a moral way or do something new in your life because you're scared something's going to happen to you. It's the great struggle of every human being, right? And now we're doing it as a country, and we're frozen solid in our own shit.
Exactly, and they're using that, and all of a sudden, if we don't have something to be afraid of, they'll find something new.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch the news, you can have a panic attack pretty easily.
Oh, you know what? It's funny you say that because recently I've been running into a lot of people, and believe me, I'm one of them. Only I can't do it because I have this radio show. Who will not read the paper anymore? I'm talking about intelligent, caring people who can't stand to look at the news. It's so depressing.
Yeah, absolutely. 12 people died in the country from some flu. Well, you know what the percentages of you dying from that flu? Not very great. That you're in a country of 300 million people. But all of a sudden, you're spending the rest of your day thinking about this. And it's just, they just use it and use it and use it to control the population. That's my firm belief.
And there's nothing new about it. The Romans did it. The Nazis did it. Everybody does it, and now we're doing it to ourselves, Yeah,
like you said, don't be a pussy. If people can't handle a little bit of risk in life, I don't know where you can live.
I don't know either, but let us move on, and perhaps someone knows the answer. All right. Dan, is that Hawaii?
No, okay. It's Louisville.
Louisville. Hold on one second. Hold on. Hold on one second. What is HAWI, Mr. Bill? Okay.
Louisville.
Well,
I said Louisville.
Louisville. Well, it's Hawaii. Now you live in Hawaii, so go ahead.
I lived in Hawaii for 10 years.
All right. You got see you knew it. All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Abra. That's up.
All right.
I've been meaning to call you for weeks,
Mm-hmm.
Ever since the 6-month anniversary of the person who maybe was better than you on the radio.
Oh, you know what? I have to say she was. She was the best there ever was.
Lynn Samuels.
I agree.
I miss her still.
Mm-hmm.
I can't stand that hole in my listening experience.
When
she's not there.
When you see all this stuff that people are saying, and you see Ryan, and you see this happen and that happen, the first thing you think of is, don't you wish she was on talking about it, right?
Oh man.
Yeah, you and me both, man.
Oh, she'd be ripping people up.
Yeah, sad.
She's still ripping people up. I can feel it.
Yeah.
As far as the conventions are concerned, I don't think there's going to be a lot of protest.
You know what? Maybe there isn't because people are afraid of the cops, and I think they've actually given up.
Well, yeah, they're telling us all the security is going to be there, and you better stay away. You better not do anything.
Well, it's effective. I mean, when you hear about armored cars and drones, you might stay away.
And people are weenie enough that they will. Stay away.
And
I
then
think it's going to be, just quiet.
Yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I think there are. I could feel it in my gut, just like what you're saying. There's going to be very few people showing up because I think they've actually given up and the government is finally won. They have actually scared everybody to death. There's going to be so many cops and so much surveillance that people are afraid to go there.
Well, and so then we've got the two similar parties bought and paid for.
By the same companies almost.
Yeah, by us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
that's our money.
Yeah. Can you imagine so far? We'll see. If you put together the Department of Homeland Security, I'm not even counting local and state government, but just federal government money, which is our tax money, right?
Yeah.
$136 million. $136 million is being spent of our tax money to put these two parties on to have these big conventions.
Yeah.
And we already know
Paying
who's
for it.
we already know who's going to be the candidates.
They've got nothing to do, so they're going to go out and party.
Yeah, but I don't want to have to pay for it. But I am.
We are.
But I am paying for it.
Well, then you go down there and protest and have a drone
Yeah.
come by and scooch you out of there.
No, I think I'll watch Teenage Wives. All right.
Thanks, Mike. Aloha.
Okay. Absolutely. Same to you. Yeah, you knew it. Dan from Fresno, you're on. Hey, you're on the radio. Yeah, you're on.
Yeah, how you doing today?
All right.
Yeah, I heard you talking about the airports and stuff like that, Homeland Security and all that.
Yeah.
Are you guys against all the pat downs, the X-ray, the taking your shoes off?
Am I against it?
Are you guys against that too, or no?
What do you mean by you guys, first of all?
Okay, I'm sorry. I guess I would say I'm a conservative, but I was just wondering.
Am I against all that? I'm against. What am I against? First of all, I haven't been on a plane for 20 years. Secondly, but I read about what happens at the airports. I think what they're doing is excessive. Yes, I do think it's excessive.
Okay, I thought I just heard another caller.
Huh?
And in my personal opinion, I was wanting to agree with you.
Oh, I see.
I thought another caller said that it's pretty extreme.
I think so. Do you?
That it's, well, 20 years ago, I could walk right up with a passenger and greet them on the gate and say bye.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that.
And, I think that's personally against my, my freedom. I can't go in the airport anymore.
Well, I would agree with you. I think the problem is what people are saying here is that there are real threats out there, and it's right to take steps to prevent a tragedy from happening. But I think it's being used as an excuse by the authorities to suppress more of our freedoms than they need to. That's the point.
No, I agree. That's what I was saying. I agree 100%. Honestly, I'm a conservative.
Mm-hmm.
We probably disagree on a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But on this issue, I think that as far as I'm concerned, you should be able to walk up. Like if my daughter, she's planning on playing, I should be able to walk up to the gate with her.
I'm with you. I agree. All right. Thanks for calling.
Hey, yeah, okay. You have a good day.
You too. Let's go to Tom in Delaware.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey.
So you finally got a healthy dose of reality TV, huh?
I never saw it before, and I only read about it, but it was worse than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that's why I stopped buying cable 2 years ago. Because that's all you have on, and you have to wonder why this country's going the way it is because you have people watching nothing but that, and then you wonder why we get idiots in the office.
Well, if they're going to constantly actually destroy people's brain cells, it's only good for them because that way then people won't really understand what they're talking about. They won't get through to the real truth of things because their brains don't work well enough from watching so much junk. So, in fact, we have improved. If we could go back in time, and we could, if the people who, let's say, run TV stations and run the government go back in time and explain to the Romans and show them, bring them back here and show them what we're doing, the Roman emperors and the people who ran Rome, they would bow down to us. They would say, you perfected what we started. Yep, you perfected it.
And, I hear people all the time at work telling me, oh, we got to get this guy out of here, and, because things haven't changed. Well, are you actually, okay, your first hour, well, I'll vote for Bush because I'd like to have a beer with him. Really? And then, well, Ryan seems like a nice guy. Do you actually ever do? I mean, I know. Other things on the internet than pornography and celebrity gossip. You can actually see the voting records. And it's really like, you should take your millions from your lucrative talk radio gig and move to Nova Scotia or something.
My millions?
Yeah.
Hold on. Well, just hold on one second. Let me see. I think I brought him with. Let me get him. I have him right here. Wait a minute. You can hear him. You hear him?
Yeah, but
okay,
really,
I brought him with me. Yeah. But you know, here's the other problem too, and this is actually aside from the general stupidity and the ignorance of the American public, which is a sad thing, obviously. But what you got is, I have to say that I don't see a whole lot of difference between the two national candidates. I'm not talking about.
You're not to cut you off, but you're the only guy I really take seriously because I can't stand all the Obama cheerleading.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'll tell you something. People who criticize Obama on left or liberal media are becoming very much like white buffaloes, and there's got to be reasons for that, but I won't go into the details. So meanwhile, here's the other problem. Even if you think the two parties, certainly at a national level, are very much the same or almost the same, you do have to say that the one thing the Republicans are doing that is far more outrageous than the Democrats is tilting the playing field so that it's almost vertical instead of horizontal. These voter suppression laws, these voter ID things, are aimed entirely at Democratic voters. If, in fact, Romney wins, perhaps the main reason will be because of these right-wing, anti-democratic voter suppression laws.
Well, no, I understand that, and I'm not in the swing state, so I can vote for Rocky. It won't matter. But, you know, if I want to have any fun, I got to go to Philly. And Philly, what's he disenfranchising, like 200,000 Obama votes at least?
Well, Pennsylvania is now turning into the swing state because apparently there are close to 750,000 estimated votes that are going to be disenfranchised by this, and probably 600,000 of them would be Democratic votes.
Well, no, I mean, you're disenfranchising the poor and the elderly.
And students, you know.
And I don't see, I mean, I'm pretty dirt broke, and you know, a vote for Romney is like, well, why don't I just shoot myself in the kneecap? That would make my life easier because then I won't have health care either. So.
Personally, I think that if, you know, I don't care about Obama much at all, but if he loses this election, the main reason will be because of these voter suppression laws in Florida, Ohio, and about 10 other states, and especially Pennsylvania, because he won Pennsylvania by a certain margin, which is far less, by the way, than the voter suppression numbers are going to be. I think that I would sue each state individually, and I would sue to stop the results of the election before they understood whether or not that was constitutional, just have an interim president.
Well, according to Ring of Fire Radio, which I actually, for a lawyer, Pat Antonio is a great guy. But, well, from what I hear, you might know something more. You're a little more radical than me.
A little more,
But he's saying they had a clip of a Republican voter saying, you know, this judge ruled, even though the ACLU came out with all these facts saying there has been no cases of voter fraud, the guy came out and said, hey, we just won Pennsylvania for Romney.
Get out. He said that, the judge?
Yeah. Go to Ring of Fire Radio.
All right. Judge. I'll believe it if I really get.
Go to Ring of Fire Radio and look this up. This one representative for the Republicans said when this judge, who sounds like a very stacked deck Republican judge,
he's a state judge.
Yeah. So that's an appointee, and he's saying, well, the ACLU is making a good case, but this could really affect the integrity of the voting, which to me is just after the past, 8 years of Bush, there's no. I have to vote because I'll be a hypocrite if I don't. But I almost don't want to.
Well, you know what? This is another case where Obama, no matter what you think of him, certainly he is a coward and he's a failure as a leader because he should if he's spending all this money on murdering people overseas or drones, whatever it is he spends money, he should pump a couple of $100 million, and he could do it in some executive way, into the Justice Department to hire about 500 lawyers, spread them out across the country, and just sue every single state, and put 30, 50, 80, 100 lawyers in every state where this is going on and stop this,
Yeah, but they're not the guys who are contributing to his war chest.
There you go.
I'm sorry, but, I actually heard, don't quote me on this. I don't have your job. I have a shitty retail job. But this one, I think it was the National Negro Action Committee, said Obama is not a friend of the black man.
Well,
Obama is only a friend of whoever's lining his pockets to pay for his commercials.
Well, I can't say a positive.
You know what? Yeah. And hey, I'm the equivalent of the idiot who calls into Fox News, except I'm left. Just, I listen to 15 minutes of Fox News, and I'm like, you know what? I think this country should burn to the ground. Run me in. Maybe people will learn a lesson.
Well, that's what a lot of people feel that, I don't know, it's not very constructive, obviously, but sometimes there's a certain way of looking at things, a certain philosophy that if things have to get much worse, sort of like an alcoholic or a narcotic addict, they have to hit bottom. The country has not maybe hit bottom yet.
Well, it's kind of like the old expression, you can tell a kid not to grab a hot pot on the stove,
right?
But you actually have to let him grab it.
At least one time, yeah. All right, listen, I got
to... sad, but all right, thanks, Mike. Great talking to you.
All right, Tom. Should we take a break now? Okay, everybody who's on the phone, stay on the phone, and as soon as we get back from the break, I won't make another speech. I'll go right to your call, but that requires hanging on to the phone, so I don't know if you can do it. Can you handle that? Let's go back and go straight to a commercial, Mr. Engineer. Okay, we're back, and let's go to Robert in Tennessee. Hi, Robert.
Mike, how are you?
Hiya.
Good. I think one reason you're seeing all this money funneled into the conventions is because these fat cats are afraid, Mike. They're afraid. They're the ones who should be afraid, because if the people ever turn out in enough numbers, you can't have enough cops.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have enough whatever terror, enforcement people. I was disappointed personally in the Occupy Wall Street movement, not in the movement itself, but in the numbers. Had enough people turned out at Wall Street, which is the epicenter of a lot of what's wrong. The New York City Police Department can't handle it. You would exhaust them. You got maybe, 15,000, 20,000 officers employed. I understand they might bring in other personnel, but you can't, you can't arrest that many people. Even if you tried to arrest, say, 5,000 or 6,000 people, what are you going to do with them?
I think, what, I don't know how, we can go into a big analysis of previous revolutions in other countries where similar things have happened. And unfortunately, if you look over in Europe and you look at Greece and you look at Spain and you look at other places, even in England, you're getting several hundred thousand people will turn out in a major city like Madrid or something like that, or in Athens, which if you translated it here would be several million people, if you adjusted for inflation of population, but this country to that country, you would get like 2 million people in the street if we were like a European country. Where are the people?
Mike, I think it may happen. I think there's going to be a breakthrough at some point. We can't continue like this. When you have these dolts like Romney, who is an empty suit, in anybody's book. Paul Ryan is a complete freak. Barack Obama, I don't know what yet. I'd be interested to hear your take on this at some point. I think Barack Obama, being a little bit young for the job, is enamored with the military. I think he's impressed by these people in costume with blah, blah, blah. And I think he's impressed with, Timothy Geithner having been at the New York Fed and all of the Goldman Sachs people that he pals around with and then claims to be a man of the people. Don't tell me you're a man of the people and charge $35,000 to $50,000 to have dinner with you, man. Come on. But at some point, Mike, I wish you'd speak too, because you've got your finger. You're close to trying to figure out how to get something done about this. But there's a continuum here. It's protests, and say I go down to Tampa, and they say, all right, you guys, you got to be 3 blocks over here. And that's where you stay, and you can protest all you want. But about, say 10,000 of us say, no, we're going to walk down to the convention center. Something like that's going to happen. And then you're going to have to go from saying no to you're going to then have to resist. And then you may actually at some point have some fighting in the street. I don't know what form it's going to take. But this cannot continue, Mike. I hear you. And I listen to you every chance I get, and I hear the passion in your voice, but we got to have some sort of breakthrough, and maybe one of these conventions or a big deal like this will be the scene of one of these things.
I wish it would be, but I have to say that if I was to bet on it, if I was to take my millions that I make here, if I had to bet on it, I would say that you're going to get almost no showing at these conventions because they've made it very clear to anybody who even dreams of showing up that you're going to get shuttled off to one side. And if you so much as step 1 foot across the line, you're going to get a club across your head, you're going to get tear gas, you're going to get pepper sprayed, rubber bullets in your face, and you're going to get, flashbang grenades thrown at you. And if you hear that kind of stuff in advance, it's going to keep a lot of people away. Water cannons. I mean, I don't really see. And the other thing is, I think people, and this is a really awful thing to be saying, I don't think people have the will anymore. I think people have actually given up thinking that they can influence their government in any way.
I think you're right. Well, enough of us are going to have to get past that way of thinking and make a stand in some form, Mike. And I agree.
I agree. Thanks, Robert.
Okay, thanks, bye.
Can we get some more calls? 866, what is it anyhow? It's 866-997-4748. 866-997-4748. And let's go to Paul in, looks like California. Are you in California?
Yes, California.
Okay. You're not on Hawaii, right?
No, I can almost see it from my front door, though.
All right, so what's up?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could help me understand something about this third-party voting, which I'm very much in favor of. However, some people are trying to scare you away by saying, if you do that, the vote's going to go toward whoever, and I'm trying to figure out how that happens and if it does and why.
Well, I mean, it's an eternal argument, right? I mean, clearly a lot of people will say that if you're on the left or you're a liberal or a Democrat and you're disgusted with the Democratic Party and Obama, which I personally am, if you vote for Rocky Anderson of the Justice Party or Jill Stein of the Green Party, then you will be deducting from the amount of votes that Obama would get. And since it's a close election, your vote for a third party might help elect Romney because you didn't vote for Obama. That is a legitimate argument. I don't think it's been absolutely proven before. I mean, people use Nader in Florida, but basically the reason that Bush won over Gore is because Bush's brother, who ran the state of Florida, threw about 150,000 voters off the rolls who were Democratic voters. That's why he won. And then the Supreme Court selected a Republican to be the president. They selected him. They're the ones who actually selected Bush. So, in fact, there's a legitimate argument to be made that if you vote for a third party, you might be taking, and you're a left or liberal, you take it away from Obama. My point of view, which I've said many, many times before, and probably I won't say anymore because I'm tired of saying it, is that I am going to vote my conscience, and I will not vote for a man, even if he loses, and to a guy who might be somewhat worse than him, like Romney. I will not vote for Obama because of his record and because of what he has done in terms of the Bill of Rights and freedom, what he's done with the military and everything. I think he's close to a dictator in certain ways, and I cannot bring myself to vote for him, even though, rationally speaking, I see that he's somewhat less worse than Romney. Some people would say he's much less worse. To me, what I'm looking at is the bigger picture. What I'm looking at is two candidates who are owned and operated by corporations and the wealthy. They never would have even got to where they are if they weren't in the first place. They were vetted by them. They are owned and operated by rich people. You just have to see who surrounds them, who supports them, where they get their money from, what their policies are like. Obama makes gestures towards women, towards Medicare, towards this, towards that, towards the other thing. I see it as a larger machine that has two arms. It's a bad machine. It's got two different looking arms. If you pick one or the other, what's the difference? The machine's going to eat you anyhow. So I see it, long answer to a short question, I see it as a moral choice. And I think, actually, that if Obama, even though he's running for election and he's going to sort of lean a little left while he runs for election, if Obama is ever going to do anything to benefit people, regular people, and he's going to steer away from giving gifts to corporations and being a militarist all over the world, it will be because people like me in their millions say, you know what, we're not going to take your stuff anymore. We're not going to vote for you. We're going to pull away from you and the whole party. Maybe we will drag him over to the left by ignoring him or voting for someone else. Anyhow, let's go to Jacob in Nebraska.
Hello.
Hey.
Yeah, I have a couple of quick points. First of all, I listened to your show a couple of times, and I fallen in love with it. You're great. You're super intelligent. It's a fresh voice on the radio. First of all, I'm 20. I'm openly gay. I live in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest, and I'm part of a fresh wave of people who, this is my first election to be able to vote in. And, to make a quick point for what you were just talking about is there's a lot of people like myself and some of my best friends. The only reason I'm voting for Obama is because of civil rights. While I know that he is full of a lot of empty promises, and I'm very angry at him for that, at least there's a glimmer of hope that he and his party can give me the rights that I deserve. You know, whether we're going to get screwed either way by the Republicans, the Democrats, we're going to pay taxes, more taxes, less taxes, you know. And aside from that, I mean...
Well, there's something to be said for voting on a single issue, which is of profound meaning and affects you personally and your friends personally. Like, I mean, you know, if you're a woman, if you're black, if you're gay, whatever, certainly the choice is pretty clear there, right?
And precisely, and I think what gets lost, and I think a lot of the pundits, whether it's Fox News or CNN or whatever it is, what gets lost in the, you know, it's not just independent voters. I'm a registered Democrat. I wouldn't care if Romney was like, oh yeah, by the way, my first thing I'm going to do tomorrow, you know, when I'm elected is give people the right to marry whoever they want. I'd be like, I'll vote for you, even though you're going to raise my taxes. At least I'll be paying, you know, to be happy with the person that I choose. And furthermore, my other point is that I don't plan on staying in this country. Like, there's a lot of people that, okay, yeah, Europe is going down the toilet financially, but they're so far ahead intellectually and, you know, democratically. You know, people think, yes, we're the most powerful nation in the country, but we're the stupidest country in the nation as far as, you know, social policy and everything. And I think that once people realize that, you know, when people come to America, I have a lot of Hispanic friends that they come here thinking this is the greatest place in the world. They spend a year and they're just like, I can't wait to get home, you know? So that really shows you something, you know.
So you're gay and you're in Nebraska. I guess your first step would be to leave Nebraska, right?
That would be. I could hop over to Iowa, but we don't think too fondly of them. But it's just and especially in a place like Nebraska, my vote, you know, if let's say, you know, if there is a God and he decided that, okay, I'm going to put, you know, gay marriage on the ballot, you know, which will never happen in Nebraska, I don't think anyway, you know, and we took a vote to it, my one vote or my friends, you know, 7 votes, you know, there's no way, at least in my lifetime, that Nebraska will ever see gay marriage.
Well, then the other argument is then, you know, if you're politically active, you stay where you are and you expand your influence, you know.
Well, you could do that, but I mean, like you said, I think that there are so many people, especially my age, they don't care about politics because they don't understand it. They don't care about it because there is nothing they can do. And that's how I feel. I'd rather go to live in Brazil or England or Australia where, you know, maybe their economy isn't as good, but at least I have more rights to do whatever the hell I want.
Yeah, and also, by the way, generally, except if you're going to live in a place where there's a dictator or somebody, you know, controls every lever of government, you have more influence over what happens in government in a parliamentary society, you know, a political structure.
More direct than what we have now. The electoral college system allows for no freedom of speech as far as electing your president or whoever, king, you know, whatever you want to call that guy.
Well, you know, I don't know what to say. I mean, it makes sense that you would vote for him rather than Romney. I mean, those people not only would not legalize gay marriage, they would probably go as far as what country is it? Uganda, making it a felony to be gay. You know. And
the thing is, I hate the phrase he or whoever says it, whether it's Obama or Romney. You know, he is out of touch with the people. Well, there's both of them. That there's, you know, people. I think when they say the word people, they either mean, you know, black straight people or white straight people, you know, and it's like there's asexual people, there's transgender people, there's gay people like me, and we are part of I can't think of a subculture. That's the best term I can think of. You know, like I said, this is going to be my first election. You know, there's going to be a new shift in power. I don't know if it's actually going to do anything significant, but it's going to give them a lot of trouble.
Well, in your case, definitely stay with the guy who already proved that, you know, he's in favor of gay rights in one way or another, you know.
You know, it's better to at least have, like I said, I know that I don't agree with Obama on, you know, on a lot of things, but I would say that if nothing else, you know, if people are out there are, wishy-washy, they don't know who to vote for, I'm not going to vote. Well, if you have a choice between two people and, you're an open-minded individual, a citizen that you want to, make the lesser of the two evils, at least allow the guy who's going to make some people happier, as long as whether or not, either party is going to make you pay more taxes, whether.
No, I get you. I get your point. No, I understand.
So, But anyway, great show. Thank you for taking my call. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Jacob, you know what? We don't really have enough time. We got other people on the line. I apologize, but we got a lot of calls, and I appreciate that. Check out my website, Fader Files. It's not as up-to-date as it could be right now, but what I do is send out mailings once in a while, opinions, little stories, little essays, messages. So sign up. Go to faderfiles.com and sign up. And I think that about does it for this week. We will be back next week with some more interesting guests and more, tilting at windmills. Go look it up.
I don't want to talk to these cocksuckers, but you have to. In life, you have to do a lot of things you don't fucking want to do.
Well, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That was only the bad call.
That's my story. Oh, that's my story. Well, I ain't got a witness, and I can't prove it, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.